To Africa, she's calling back the wind. Come back home to Africa, the planet cat and golden rain are waiting for you once again. Coming back, I'm longing for my family. Coming back to you. Out of bondage and now I am free. Come back home to Africa. You're going your name to the wind. Come back home to Africa. The planet cat and golden rain are waiting for you once again. Coming back. I'm longing for my family. Coming back to you. Out of bondage. Come back home to Africa. Come back home. Come back home to Africa. Come back home. Da, 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 da,
Greetings, 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 divine, all blessed, peace and love, joy and prosperity, elevation, revelations, and manifestation. You are now listening live to the Divine Prince, an African spiritualist, practitioner, author, and advisor, Elagun Oloye Hoodoo Obeah Bokor, sharing with you in all things spiritual, mystical, metaphysical, cosmic, universal, evolutionary, revolutionary, healing, and holistic from a Pan-African hoodoo world spiritualist perspective, understanding that all is indeed a blessing. If you can just see beyond the veils, for it is all just an illusion, and a test and one of the greatest divine mysteries of this life cycle. This is my constant prayer, my mantra, affirmation, reverberation, reiteration, and it is my ever living reality. All is a blessing is crucial to the very foundation of my inner standing, my teaching, my walk, my works along this divine, all blessed life path and journey. It is how I, the divine prince, make sense out of all that we're challenged with here in our daily existence on Mother, Father Earth. And it is my personal place of power and inner standing, the place from where I begin, the place from where I realize and crystallize all my endeavors, understanding that I and I alone create and co create my divine destiny, and I alone create and co create my divine, all blessed reality. And so it is. Ashe, Asheo, and Ashe. Greetings, greetings, one and all. Greetings to each and every one of you collectively and certainly individually. Today is May 28th, 2024, and I am emanating and vibrating with you and for you now live, virtually, verbally, cosmically, quantum universally from this working temple of the House of the Divine Prince. Thai Potions, Hoodoo Central LLC in the legendary, historic, beautiful, and most enchanted city in America, New Orleans, Louisiana, the land of my ancestors and those who came before me along this spiritualist hoodoo Obeah life path and journey, passing down the great Obeah stick along with the knowledge of the life-giving herbs, roots, plants, rituals, spirits, minerals, and indeed the legacy, the culture, tradition, the history of our sacred stories. I certainly implore you, invite you to join us here at high noon U.S. Central Standard Time, weekdays at high noon U.S. Central Standard Time for the Power Lunch, revolutionary Hoodoo New Orleans Voodoo secrets and recipes. My live listening and calling number is area code 563-999-3763. 563, toll free area code 563-999-3763. Greetings, Kevin Brooks. Greetings, everyone who's now listening to me live by way of Blog Talk Radio, internationally, certainly, and those who are sharing and visiting with me by way of Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, my EarthCam page. Greetings, Alexis Williams. Greetings and salutations to you, beloved. I certainly appreciate you. All is truly and indeed a blessing. I've been discussing over a series of podcasts about the active usage footprint of magic, witchcraft, including ATR, traditional African based religious systems, certainly Pan African spirituality and religion, spirituality and tradition, and most certainly Aboriginal indigenous practice as it still is present in the world. And its usage in not just religion or culture, but certainly its usage in government, its usage in politics, and its usage in revolution and resistance. Certainly, the most quickest to come to mind is the revolution, the Haitian Revolution, the only successful revolution in the world as it relates to Black national identity. But we have a recorded footprint of voodoo, root work, conjure, black magic, if you will, witchcraft, um, and certainly indigenous and aboriginal practices being utilized to fuel, protect, defend, and also see for, to divine and read into the various scenarios which we found ourselves in, particularly in the New World in the last 500 years or so. Witchcraft may be as old as humanity, if not older, and very much associated with the past. Witchcraft is believed by many to be an old affair, much like people believe the miracles of the Bible and the Quran and the Torah to be ancient and old news, if not old affairs. And once portrayed as the worst, most evil, most barbaric practice of all, it has today moved forward to become portrayed as um, magical and beautiful and popular and intricate, particularly in pop culture and mass media. In the 21st century, people find themselves watching movies such as Harry Potter, certainly The Skeleton Key, Serpent in the Rainbow, TV shows like Charmed, and cartoons like Sabrina, much laced with entertainment, creative license, um, musing, if you will, about a really actual ethno-cultural practice and tradition, which has a global, if not universal, footprint. Most have thus forgotten that supposedly scary witches and the bloodshed during the European witch hunts, when many countries have moved forward on witchcraft. We're going to talk today about Ghana. I spent a little time in Ghana. We talk Pan African tradition, and we spent a lot of time in Nigeria, Benin, Togo. But today we want to talk about witchcraft and its historic, legendary footprint and its modern footprint, if you will, in Ghana. Ghana is very much living in the past, some would say. And the belief has, in fact, survived and revived to become the most modern Ghanaian belief and practice there could be. It is difficult to pin a certain date for the beginning of quote unquote witchcraft in Ghana. The belief has started way before Ghana's colonization in 1867. Nonetheless, witchcraft belief and practice have changed through history to accommodate the social change and the different needs of the Ghanaians. The integration of new religions, the existence of anti witchcraft shrines, and the everyday struggle faced by every Ghanaian have made witchcraft an important aspect of minority, of modernity, the modern pop culture. One intriguing feature of witchcraft in Ghana is its widespread belief. About 90% of Ghanaians believe in witchery, notwithstanding their social class, level of education, or religious belief. We find a very similar footprint, despite the bourgeoisie in Haiti's attempt to sort of crush voodoo and Aboriginal practice. We certainly are seeing a growing footprint, new extension of a old footprint here in the U.S. of people now returning to indigenous Aboriginal practice and tradition, if not witchcraft directly and specifically. And apparently, most of them can recall at least one instance where evil forces have attempted to wreck their lives in Ghana or the lives of others that they know in Ghana. And this demonstrates that the belief in witchcraft is very much real in Ghana. And I've discussed over the years the controversial political nature of just the word witchcraft, particularly in relation to how we use it here in the states and in the West, and how it's still used but applied in these Aboriginal regions of the world, where we like to give credit and honor and acknowledgement to the ancestors for building and creating these traditions that have survived not just colonization and the attacks of missionaries, but certainly wars, rumors of wars, the Middle Passage, and certainly enslavement and white supremacy. So the belief in and the real footprint of magic, witchcraft, uh, at its most basic level, and then certainly more specific ethno-cultural arts, sciences, math, and traditions that one might associate as being magical is growing. And we tend to isolate ourselves, at least mentally and philosophically here in the West. And we think that that's just an American thing or an internet thing. But certainly it's happening in South Africa, Zambia, Kenya, Ghana, Egypt, Ethiopia, um, Palestine, Israel, Greece, Italy. It's certainly happening and now has a documented footprint all over the world, and not just at the cultural level, not just in these streets, but at the political level, at the governmental level, fueling institutions. Some of you are familiar with the enchantment. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, rulers of the darkness of this world, spiritual wickedness in high places. Certainly references to governments, institutions, organizations, organized minds, if you will, coming together. And so we've created this false narrative, this false polarity of white and black, good magic, black magic, what's positive versus what's evil and wicked, and thus try and apply those as adjectives to people, places, and things. So we, in our minds, somehow try and separate religion from witchcraft, church from witchcraft, the shrine and the synagogue and the mosque from witchcraft, and certainly the cultural nuances that support these institutions. We somehow have segregated that. We've been distracted and taught to segregate that in our minds. So much so that we call them saints. We call them holy men and women. We assume their sanctity and their presumed divinity without identifying and recognizing their footprint, certainly their demonstration, and then our experience, our world experience with people, places, things, crafts, traditions, organizations, and particularly here, this side of the Middle Passage in the United States, we've been bitterly, sorely burnt by religions, organizations, whether they be religious, secular, political, educational, uh, secret orders. We all have our tales and our stories that tend to affect how we view these practices and these traditions much more organically, and particularly those of us who are claiming to be reborn or renewed, or now following a more spiritual path, shedding, the ways of our upbringing in many cases, and certainly that which society, wherever you are in the world, because this is an international audience, the societal politics of government, religion, uh, where you live certainly affect how we talk about these practices, how we demonstrate these practices, how we show up in these practices. So my ongoing question in the last month or so has been, what are you doing with it? Whether you're in the closet with it or you're out in the full sun and moonlight, what are you doing with it? Certainly we want to heal, repair, replenish, starting with the self, starting with me, starting at the center. And that then affects the family, the peers, the group, the society. and certainly the planet as a whole. Keeping in mind that these practices, first and foremost, have their root in nature. Before we begin to speak of witchcraft, which speaks of consciousness, even some would suggest ego or ego out of balance. We must first picture nature, voodoo, Ifa, Santeria, Lukomi, the various practices of the Sangoma, and the traditions throughout the indigenous Aboriginal world, nature, and our ability to identify with nature within us and outside of our physical shaped bodies, but also within the dynamic of our healing, our very survival, our nutrient supply, but certainly it feeds spirit. Our physical reality is just a mirror image, an illusion, if you will, of our spiritual reality. Math and science and string theory supports this. I've said and have taught for many years that spirit is more real, more tangible, more evident, more effectageous than anything we can envision in the physical, or indeed the physical material realm is transitory, constantly transitioning, constantly changing as the very cells in our body regenerate every 7 years. Certainly, our planet regenerates itself moment to moment, season to season, year for year, century for century. And we are, as we've discussed in previous shows, we are the universe, we are the galaxy. Our very minerals, our very, not minerals, our molecules and atoms are certainly the very stardust which, moves around us and falls upon our planet each and every day. So we are spirit, and indeed, spirit is in us and within us, and we then mirror that, demonstrate that in the material, in the flesh reality. And so there's an attempt to share not only the similarities, in how we do things here in our community in the US, with how many of our brothers and sisters and cousins and blood DNA relatives are still doing it in the Aboriginal world, but certainly to bring it into context to what's going on in the world right now. I suggest, strongly books like Spellbound, The Stigma of Witchcraft in Ghana, Kojo A. Sena book, You Devil, Go Away From Me, some ethnographic comments on evil diseases in a Ghanaian village. And there are many others that I've come across and read and researched in my exploring this topic of revolution and voodoo, revolt and voodoo, resistance and voodoo, but protest and voodoo. The very act of using the word, and certainly the word with four O's, is revolutionary, is resistance. It resists a greater uh, culture that would suggest that voodoo is something specific outside of ourselves, particularly outside of those of us who are the product of the Middle Passage. And so I want to share a little bit more today about the Ghanaian experience as it relates to root work, conjure, magic, and certainly I'll be using um, witchcraft today, a word that I typically sort of taboo from my discussions and make a clear distinction between the ethno cultural demonstration of our spirit versus the politicized word witchcraft and all the negative connotations and witchery that is now sort of socially associated with it. Set in modern Ghana, I'm attempting through usage of many documents, formats, research materials to demonstrate the study of witchcraft in modern society. And it's imperative to study the historical framework of witchcraft belief in the African country from pre-colonial era to the modern era, passing by colonial times. Hence, the first chapter is written as a background chapter. The chapter is divided into three parts: pre-colonial Ghana, colonial Ghana, and modern Ghana. And each section discusses the belief in witchcraft while highlighting the occurring changes that are happening in the particular era. Moreover, the first chapter explains a number of concepts which are crucial to the understanding of witchcraft belief and practice in this country. Part A of the first chapter on pre-colonial Ghana discusses the differences between African traditional religion, ATR, and witchcraft. In order to do so, the chapter defines African traditional religion and witchcraft separately to then indicate the differences between the two while still showing their unmistakably intertwined relationship. Next, this part puts witchcraft in a historical framework through the help of European traders and certain missionaries who have documented on the belief. And overall, this section aims to study a different witchcraft from that of today while deconstructing some of the misconceptions propagated by colonial scholars. It also brings into light witch doctors who will prove themselves to be fundamental factors in the belief in witchcraft. Greetings, Martha Martinez. Greetings to my Blog Talk Radio audience and those who are sharing and listening in all of the available social media spaces. Part B of the document is divided in two sections. The first section goes from 1867 to the 1920s, and the second section goes from 1920 to Ghana's independence in 1957. Separating this part into two contrasting but continuous timeframes is made to bring into perspective the British colonies' transition from denial to acceptance of the anti-witchcraft practice. The paper first highlights the colonizers' efforts to stop witchcraft. In vain, the latter decide to accept the belief. In conclusion, thanks to British colonies, African churches were made and created. The latter changed witchcraft practices forever for both Christian and non-Christian Ghanaians. And we saw a similar demonstration with the Black Spiritualist churches here in Louisiana and certainly in its migration into the Deep South and upriver into places like Memphis, St. Louis, Chicago, and throughout Black America. And finally, part C may be perceived as an introduction to the rest of the paper about modern times. This section discusses the factors that reinforce and maintain the belief in witchcraft, the practices of witchcraft and anti-witchcraft, and the violence inflicted on the witches living in witch camps in which accursed witches live. And these concepts will be studied respectively in the second, third, and last chapter. In previous podcasts, I've also briefly spoke on the camps for those with biological conditions that make them targets of witchcraft, and particularly albinos, which is a real unfortunate, ever-present thing in some regions of the continent where these people literally have to escape for their lives and sort of live in communal settings to protect themselves from those that would otherwise harm them for not traditional Aboriginal indigenous spirituality and tradition, but indeed for witchcraft. And that's why we must make a distinction between the two, the usage of the word, how it's being used, and the root that's being pulled from. Greetings, Jody, Netta. Come on in. Peace and blessings. Yeah, the albino thing is unfortunately not new, Alexis Williams, and it's well documented, even in social media. Thank you, Kevin Brooks. Oh wow, the author of the song's name is usually on the tip of my tongue. Come back to Africa, and she made it available decades ago on a copyright-free, duty-free, music-free site, and I've been using it ever since. So I thank you all for being present today for this discussion, ultimately on witchcraft, not just in the mother continent, but certainly in through the Middle Passage into Central, South, and North America, and its active usage in modern times. We've talked in previous shows and will continue to talk about its active usage in the political community, at the governmental level, and certainly within the religious community here in the United States, and particularly within communities that we assume, have a staunch anti-witchcraft position, but we have documented footprint that we find witchcraft actively being used in the evangelical community, in the Protestant community, in the Catholic community. It's just kept secret and quiet and in the closet and on the down low. Many of your Botanica store owners can certainly speak and attest to the diversity of individuals that come in to shop in Botanica establishments throughout the United States. Be they called Botanicas, be they called spiritual supply shops, spiritual and church and religious candle shops, often mask the availability of supplies for various world practices and traditions, not to exclude even witchcraft. So the second chapter, fundamental to the understanding of Ghanaian witchcraft, discusses the different factors that have strengthened and kept this belief intact. And additionally, the chapter seeks to understand Ghanaians' obsession with witchcraft and witches. In Haiti, they just call it superstitions or superstition. 5 factors are to be studied in this chapter. The 3 main religions, African traditional religion, ATR, Christianity, and Islam, and poverty and patriarchy. And certainly we will not be able to cover it all in the remaining 30 minutes we have in the show. So it will be a part of our ongoing discussion. The second session of chapter 2 explores the belief in witchcraft in relation to ATR, African traditional religion. Since African religion has changed throughout times and evolved and modified and synchronized and um, um, in some cases even appropriated other regional practices, beliefs, and traditions. This section first defines the native religion while drawing on the similarities and differences of the same religion, but decades prior. One of the main features of this section are the gods and the indigenous priests' work in keeping witchcraft a relevant practice, even when they themselves are withering away. And perhaps one shall correctly say that the two are merging with the newer religions, Christianity and Islam. In a nutshell, this chapter argues for the importance of ATR, regardless of the number of explicitly adhering Ghanaians. And it sounds very Black American. It sounds very African American, but I mind you, and for those who are just coming in, I'm talking about Ghana right now, modern Ghana. In section 2, the paper considers Islam's critical relation to witchcraft. Rather ignored in the first chapter, the essay attempts to redeem itself as an arguably modern religion. Islam was expected by many to be rigid when it comes to witchcraft, much like we expect evangelicalism or Catholicism to be rigid when it comes to witchcraft, especially when said witchcraft is related to another religion, i.e., ATR, traditional African based religious systems. With this being said, one quickly um, realizes that Islam and Muslims in Ghana are quite different from their Arab counterparts. This chapter examines the supposed flexibility and indigenousness of Islam. These may have made of Islam a factor in the propagation of a mixture of Muslim related witchcraft and indigenous witchcraft. And as we've discussed in previous shows, even words like Alafia um, have an Arabic linguistic root to them. It is my understanding and what I was taught by the elders and certainly by those aboriginal to Yoruba land that the word is not inherently Yoruba, but has that trade route Arabic footprint from East Africa to West Africa, and it's just now crystallized in the Yoruba language, much like we've crystallized uh, foreign words and language usage in English, so much so that we assume them to be English words, but they have footprints in other ethno-cultural regions and traditions. In section 2, the paper considers Islam's critical relationship to witchcraft. The third section focuses on witchcraft's belief in relationship to Christianity, being the most practiced religion in modern day Ghana. This category is conceivably the most important one of the previous two, though the Islamic factor in the propagation and the mixture of Islam and witchcraft is in itself not new as well. We have documented um, Islamic symbolism and reference in the global footprint of voodoo, going back to colonization, going back to um, pre colonial times. And so the paper also demonstrates Christianity's major shift to accommodate with witchcraft in various regions of the world, but particularly as it relates to Ghana. This can be seen in the relationship created between the devil and witches. In general, Christianity has merged with African religion to become the most practiced religion in Ghana, a religion that happens to believe in witchcraft and its evilness. The last section of this chapter studies poverty and the patriarchy role in propagating witchcraft. This section argues that if the three religions have created witchcraft, it is poverty and patriarchy that make witches. It has been established that the belief in witchcraft is widespread over Ghana. However, prosecuted witches are only found in the northern part of Ghana and in a few tribes in southern Ghana. These parts of the country have the highest levels of poverty and illiteracy. In conclusion, this section draws on a few scholars' work so as to prove patriarchy and poverty's implementation in the making of witches. Moving to the third chapter, this part of the paper shares the different witchcraft and anti witchcraft practices found in Ghana, or at least believed to be part of African witchcraft. Perhaps one of the less documented parts of this research, the practice of witchcraft and anti witchcraft is largely neglected by scholars since many believe it to be non existent. The chapter thus aims to provide a review of said practices while trying to be as unbiased as possible. Most researchers have made of the witch a victim of society, a poor woman, usually a woman, accused of witchery with little to no evidence. And while this is largely true, scholars have neglected the woman that confess to using witchcraft, those that quite deliberately seek the help of the witch doctors. This part then attempts to understand the reasons and motives behind such confessions. Furthermore, the first part of this chapter provides us with the skills and abilities needed to be a witch, as well as the ways in which a witch performs witchcraft. The second part on anti witchcraft practice provides the reader with the different types of people that visit anti witchcraft shrines, the different ways that could lead a witch to be put on trial, the different methods that could possibly heal a witch of evil forces, witchcraft. Overall, this part demonstrates the importance of witch doctors in the life of Ghanaians and how these priests are more than hunters and healers. Indeed, one can see that shrines bring peace and joy to the rather dull Ghanaian life, sadly at the expense often of the women. The last chapter deals with the government and human rights organizations' take on witch camps. Both praised and despised for their work, this chapter analyzes the different laws that make witch camps illegal. It goes without saying that the chapter will additionally study the work of those who argue for the maintenance of these witch camps. Because the chapter has tackled witchcraft as a general practice, both in the north and southern part of Ghana, the paper first defines witch camps and puts them in a historical time frame. The witch camps, which exclusively exist in the northern of Ghana, are to be analyzed in terms of their number of residents, their rituals, and their living conditions. To better understand the gravity of these prison camps, a number of stories and figures are to be shared. The chapter then goes on to give various laws from the 1992 Constitution of Ghana, international law, and CEDAW, Conventions on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. CEDAW, Conventions on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. This part considers the Constitution's refusal to put up an explicit law against witchcraft. It attempts to understand the outliving of witch camps and their importance. And finally, this part gives various ways through which organizations have struggled to help witches. The last section shares different scholars and humanitarians' views on witch camps. It is put into three categories: those that consider camps prisons, those that consider them sanctuaries, and those that define them as prison sanctuaries. And again, it has um, it has a great deal of intersectionality with how witches witchery, and certainly spiritual practices in general have been sort of viewed and treated over the history of the so-called America, and the Salem witch trials is just, one well-known example. According to Judith Bachman, most of West African Pentecostal accounts present Ghanaian witchcraft as a traditional African force inherent in the indigenous cultures. Now, this is the Ghanaian and West African Pentecostal accounts, which we know, particularly in the last 30 years, have been greatly influenced by the Pentecostal, apostolic, holiness, sanctified, um, often masked under the general umbrella evangelical footprint. For those of you who don't understand what evangelical is more specifically, historically, traditionally, it encompassed apostolic, Pentecostal, so-called holiness, sanctified, speaking in tongues, fire baptism based traditions, which has, certainly been imported consistently into the continent, and certainly into East and West Africa. We have historic accounts in modern times in Uganda, and certainly in West Africa, to include Nigeria, Cameroon, and certainly Ghana. That is to say that witchcraft is a creation of African cultures and religions that have existed for centuries prior to Ghana's colonization in 1857. However, if the belief is solemnly indigenous, then why is it that so many Christians still believe in it and fear witchcraft? And to say you don't believe it, or to say that it's of the devil, or to say that you fear witchcraft, is to suggest that you believe in it. It's hard to believe in something, or fear something that you don't believe even exists. And certainly that has, to begin the conversation of, well, it has no power against my Jesus, must first start from a platform of existence. And what do these Pentecostal churches make of the British colonies and Christianity's impact on the beliefs? By going back in history, this chapter attempts to answer these questions, ultimately hoping to showcase the transnationality of Ghanaian witchcraft. Much before the colonial period, Ghanaians had a religion of their own, called today by its practitioners African traditional religion. And certainly in ATR, we know it to be ethno-culturally specific, where you have the Akan, the Fan, the Ewe, the Va, the Ga, etc., under this umbrella of ATR, African traditional religions. But again, we're going to speak specifically to Ghana. This name was given by today's scholars in an effort to cast previous derogatory names such as animism, fetishism, heathenism, paganism, toteism, totemism. The word traditional is used to avoid primitive or tribal connotations, as well as to show that Africans did have a religion prior to the arrival of colonialism. So those, who still told we just had spirituality, we did not have religion, you're actually toting a colonial white supremacist platform by stating so. The word traditional is used to avoid the primitive or tribal connotations, as well as to show that Africans did have religion prior to the arrival of the missionaries, the Arabs, the Imam, and the white man, the colonizers. African traditional religion was not given a specific name by its first users, or we identified regionally, ethnoculturally, family might sound better to you. Community, what neck of the woods are you from? Might sound more, you know, uh, palatable to your understanding. And its origins is rather unknown, which is why we can say, magic, voodoo, witchcraft probably existed before governments, before organizations, certainly before written and well documented material. I've discussed on previous shows about newfound um, archaeological sites with burials that formerly were thought not possible for pre-human hominids, Neanderthals who were not only burying in cave-like structures, but also marking in some way. Um, and we don't know whether they were marking the process, the ceremony, the individuals, but certainly left coded symbolic imagery. This, however, this religion had its shrines, rituals, gods, spirits, and deities, much like any other polytheistic religion. And these were all ignored as colonists and missionaries in an effort to rule over Ghana, accused traditional African religion as being savage, uncivilized, barbaric. They refused to call it religion. In fact, their academic records were too subjective and unreliable, being based on racial and religious prejudice, because they wrote so that they might catch the interest of the readers back in Europe and in the so-called New World. Accusing African religion of being no more than witchcraft made it easy for the British to not only colonize Ghana, but also to introduce their monotheistic religion, known today as African Christianity. And so, again, I offer that its modern propagation is an attempt, again, to demonize, and if not demonize, certainly appropriate, um, capitalize, commercialize, bastardize the tradition. And for those of you who are interested in this topic, I've got, oh my goodness, a bibliography of references that you can study and expose yourself to, that many of my students and initiates are already exploring. African Christianity, similar to how I describe American Christianity, is decidedly Black in many ways. Um, Certainly, the white supremacist footprint is ever present globally on the practice, on the tradition. Sort of the meat and potatoes that hold these religious sacred spaces together are often rooted in Black, African, Aboriginal, regional belief and tradition. As a result, many Africans are today ashamed of their own cultural heritage because of the over footprint of white supremacy through government, through politics, through education, even through health care. Uh, we're often given the option of sitting through a ceremony, sitting through a prayer, sitting through a sermon, even before we offer food and water, clothing and housing to the homeless in both Africa and the US. Indeed, the British have created an inferiority complex found in almost every once colonized country in the world. In order to understand witchcraft as it is in modern times, one has to first understand African traditional religion as being different from African Christianity and Ghanaian witchcraft. So when we say hoodoo ain't possible without a Bible, you're preaching African Christianity, which is not exactly ATR. And the same thing is being duplicated. It's happening in West Africa and the westernized, capitalized, religiousized, Christian environments of West Africa, and particularly Ghana. African Christianity, as its name suggests, is the mixing of Christian and African beliefs. In other words, it is performing African rituals in a Western way. African traditional religion, or ATR, on the other hand, is defined as Yeo Kayuame, as the belief that everything moving or not is the receptacle of a soul or spirit. The spirits who propagate the world have their own independent will that the living humans ought to please. Nokuzola Mindende instead chooses to find African religion in contrast to African Christianity by highlighting that it is neither preached to them nor imported by them. Africans are not converted to, each person is born into, lives it, practices it, and is also proud to make it his own. And it's interesting because, again, we have very similar sayings, probably rooted in this sort of Aboriginal ancestral DNA coding in our very blood. We have very similar beliefs, very similar sayings here in the US, and I'm sure certainly in the UK. And we assume, and it's assumed so, that it's an equaling of the playing field of these traditions, not so much a watering down or a syncretizing and amalgamating, with the ultimate purpose to remove, suck the power, delight, vampirize the very ashe and energy out of these practices and these traditions. We also say it's a lifestyle. We also say, it's born in us, and we're born to it here in the West. We don't proselytize. It's neither preached to them nor imported by them. Certainly in Ghana, equally as we do and say here in the US.
90 seconds.
I have so much more I want to say and I want to share on this topic. I certainly appreciate those of you who are present with me live in the chat, both here in StreamYard and also in Blog Talk Radio chat space. I certainly invite you to join us here at high noon US Central Standard Time by way of my Blog Talk Radio listening and calling number, area code 563 999 3763 563 999 3763. Certainly, you can always hook up your webcam, and I will certainly invite you in to the StreamYard space by way of the StreamYard link. I certainly am grateful and appreciative of my Facebook page, my Facebook pages, my LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, which is now X. Do we stop saying formerly Twitter now? It's now X. And certainly my EarthCam page. I'm certainly grateful for your consistent listenership and participation. And I look forward to meeting you here again at high noon US Central Standard Time for another evolution, revolution, revolutionary voodoo, New Orleans voodoo secrets and recipes. That alarm catches me every day. All is a blessing.
Congo Square. The Omas Indians prepared this place for us centuries before our arrival. A sacred spot where corn festivals were celebrated. The Omas Indians prepared this place for us centuries before our arrival. Congo Square, a sacred spot where corn festivals were celebrated. And as the colonizers came, our hosts, the Omas Indians, they pushed aside our hosts. The colonizers came and pushed aside our hosts and introduced us in chains. And by the late 1700s, we somehow, recognizing the sacredness of Le Pla, the Congo, we somehow, and the how of our somehow persuasive methodologies is not clear at this moment. The how is not clear. How our persuasive methodologies work is not clear at this moment, but nevertheless, even as slaves, we crafted and created a space where we could be free to be we. And thusly we countered the sacrilegiousness of the French, giving great homage to our ancestors as well as giving praise and thanks to our red-blooded brothers and sisters. This is an oral libation toast to Congo Square, to Native Americans, to our ancestors who made a circle out of a square and gave us a way to save ourselves from the transformatory ugliness of America, which refuses to recognize the spirituality of life, which refuses to recognize the spirituality of life and celebrates death with crosses, double and triple crosses, the middle passage, the first cross, Christianity, the double cross, and capitalism, the ultimate triple coup de grace cross of our captivity. But the terror of crosses notwithstanding, we sang, we beat, we be, we was and is, hail Congo Square. Congo Square. Our African gods have not been obliterated. They have merely retreated inside the beat of us. Inside the beat of us. Our African gods have not been obliterated. They have merely retreated inside the beat of us until we are ready to release them into a world that we recreate. A world held by the beating of black heart drums. Heartbeat. At this place, beat, heartbeat, beat, we beating place in new world space, beating, being in place in new world, preserving our ancient taste. Our dance is the God walk, our music the God talk. First thing we do, let's get together, circle ourselves into community. No beginning, no end, connected together and singing, ringing, singing in a ring. Second, let's be original, aboriginal. Be what we were before we became what we are. Be bambula dance. Be danza music. And sing song words which have no English translation. Third, let us remember. Let us remember never to forget, even when we can't remember the specifics, we must retain the essentials. Let us remember never to forget, even when we can't remember the specifics, we must retain the essentials. The bounce, the blood, flow, the feel, the spirit, grow, energy, must retain and pass on the essential usness that others want to dissipate without of us. Whoa! But no matter how much of us they prohibit, no matter how much of us they prohibit, deep inside us is us. Deep inside us is us. Remains us inside and needs only the beat to set us free. The beat to free us. It is morning, a Sunday, a field without shade, but dark with the people lack of us in various shades, eclipsing the sun without elegance. We are centuries later now, and still this sacred ground calls us to remember, to be. We are centuries later now, and still this sacred ground calls us to remember, to be, beat, Congo square. Be, Congo square. Beat, 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 beat. Congo square. Beat, Congo square. Beat, 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 beat. Remember. Remember. Remember.
Thank you for using Blog Talk Radio. Goodbye.